Namaste, Dhanava Pranam. By the instruction and grace of our spiritual master, Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa, Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj, we are here reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're also paying our humble obeisance to Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada for providing us this wonderful commentary and translation of Bhagavatam. We are also praying to Srimati Radharani, following the guidance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who told us if we cannot find anything about Srimati Radharani in the 18,000 verses of Bhagavatam, then our study has been wasted. So in this way, we are praying to Srimati Radharani. Yadi seva vanchitasya ma yasya kripaya vayam labhima sarvam prapnuma prayojanam damni Shri Bhagavat Pade Krishna sambandhi sarvam cha yadinha jani mahe tutam ashtadashasu sahasreshu shlokanam Bhagavat otishu radharanimna vindamatada Nishphalam Bhagavat Adhyayanam Radhikaya Kripam Vina Vyartasyat Sarva Parishrama. If we are cheated out of serving that personality whose mercy awards us everything we need, including residence in the Lord's holy Dham and all things connected to Krishna, and if we cannot understand or discover Radharani within the 18,000 verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, then our study of Srimad Bhagavatam has been pointless. Without the mercy of Srimati Radharani, all our efforts are in vain. So we are continuing our reading from Canto 4, the creation of the fourth order. Chapter 29, talks between Nārada and King Prācīnabarhi, text 52. Nārada uvacha prasna evam hi sanchino bhavata purushar shaba atra me vadato guyam nishamaya sunishchitam. The great Saint Nārada continued, O great personality, I have replied properly about all that you have asked me. Now hear another narration that is accepted by saintly persons and is very confidential. Purport. Sri Nārada Muni is personally acting as the spiritual master of King Barhisman. It was Nārada Muni's intention that through his instructions the king would immediately give up all engagement in fruitive activity and take to devotional service. However, although the king understood everything, he was still not prepared to give up his engagements. As the following verses will show, the king was contemplating sending for his sons, who were away from home executing austerities and penances. After they returned, he would entrust his kingdom to them and then leave home. This is the position of most people. They accept the bona fide spiritual master and listen to him. But when the spiritual master indicates that they should leave home and fully engage in devotional service, they hesitate. The duty of the spiritual master is to instruct the disciple as long as he does not come to the understanding that this The duty of the spiritual master is to instruct the disciple as long as he does not come to the understanding that this materialistic way of life, fruitive activity, is not at all beneficial. Actually, one should take to devotional service from the beginning of life. As Prahlad Maharaj advised, Kumhara acharit pragyo dharman bhagavatan iha, from Bhagavat Purana 7.6.1. According to all the instructions of the Vedas, we can understand that unless one takes to Krishna consciousness and devotional service, he is simply wasting his time engaging in the fruitive activities of material existence. Nārada Muni therefore decided to relate another allegory to the king so that he might be induced to give up family life within material existence. Text 53. Kshudram charam samunasham sharane mititva raktam sadhangri gana samashasu lubda karnam agrave rakannasu tripo viganaya yantam priste mrigam mrigaya lubdaka banhabinam. My dear king, please search out that deer who is engaged in eating grass in a very nice flower garden along with his wife. That deer is very much attached to his business, and he is enjoying the sweet singing of the bumblebees in his garden. Just try to understand his position. He is unaware that before him is a tiger, which is accustomed to living at the cost of another's flesh. Behind the deer is a hunter who is threatening to pierce him with sharp arrows. Thus the deer's death is imminent. Purport. Here's an allegory in which the king is advised to find a deer that is always in a dangerous position. Although threatened from all sides, the deer simply eats grass in a nice flower garden, unaware of the danger all around him. All living entities, especially human beings, think themselves very happy in the midst of families, as if living in a flower garden and hearing the sweet humming of bumblebees. Everyone is centered around his wife, who is the beauty of family life, and bumblebees humming may be compared to the talk of children. The human being, just like the deer, enjoys his family without knowing that before him is the factor of time, which is represented by the tiger. The fruit of activities of a living entity simply create another dangerous position and oblige him to accept different types of bodies. For a deer to run after a mirage, of water in the desert is not unusual. The deer is also very fond of sex. The conclusion is that one who lives like a deer will be killed in due course of time. Vedic literatures therefore advise that we should understand our constitutional position and take to devotional service before death comes. According to Bhagavatam 11.9.29, Labdva siddhorlabam idam bahu sambhavante manusyam artadham anityam apiha dira tornam yateta na patad anumrityayavan nehishrayasya vishaya kalu sarvatasyat. After many births, we have attained this human form. Therefore, before death comes, we should engage ourselves in transcendental loving service of the Lord. That is the fulfillment of human life. Text 54. Sumana sama dharmanam strinam sharana ashrame pushpa madhu Gandhavat Chudratamam Kamya Karma Vipakajam Kamashuka Lavam Jaivayo Pastyadi Vichinvantam Mithuni Bhuyatad Abhinivishita Manasam Sadangri Ganasama Kitavad Ati Manohara Vanitari Janalapeshvatitaram Ati Pralobita Karnam Agre Vraka Yutavad Atmanayor Harato Horatrantan Kalalava Visheshan Aviganhaya Griheshu Viharantam Pristata Eva Paroksham Anupravrito Lubdaka Kritanto nita sharanena yam iha paravidyati tamimam atmanam ahorajan bina hridayam drastum arhashiti. My dear king, a woman who is very attractive in the beginning, but in the end is very disturbing, is exactly like the flower, which is attractive in the beginning and detestable at the end. With women, the living entity is entangled with lusty desires, and he enjoys sex, just as one enjoys the aroma of a flower. He thus enjoys a life of sense gratification from his tongue to his genitals, and in this way the living entity considers himself very happy in family life. United with his wife, he always remains absorbed in such thoughts. He feels great pleasure in hearing the talk of his wife and children, which are like the sweet humming of bumblebees that collect honey from flower to flower. He forgets that before him is time, which is taking away his lifespan with the passing of day and night. He does not see the gradual diminishing of his life, nor does he care about the superintendent of death who is trying to kill him from behind. Just try to understand this. You are in a precarious position and are threatened from all sides. Purport. Materialistic life means forgetting one's constitutional position as the eternal servant of Krishna, and this forgetfulness is especially enhanced in the Grihastha ashram. In the Grihastha ashram, a young man accepts a young wife who is very beautiful in the beginning, but in due course of time, after giving birth to many children and becoming older and older, she demands many things from the husband to maintain the entire family. At such a time, the wife becomes detestable to the very man who accepted her in her younger days. One becomes attached to the Grihastha ashram for two reasons only. The wife cooks palatable dishes for the satisfaction of her husband's tongue, and she gives him sexual pleasure at night. A person attached to the Grihastha ashram is always thinking of these two things, palatable food and sex enjoyment. The talks of the wife which are enjoyed as a family recreation, and the talks of the children both attract the living entity. He thus forgets that he has to die someday and has to prepare for the next life if he wants to be put into a congenial body. The deer in the flower garden is an allegory used by the great sage Nārada to point out to the king that the king himself is similarly entrapped by such surroundings. Actually, everyone is surrounded by such a family life, which misleads one. The living entity thus forgets that he has to return home back to Godhead. He simply becomes entangled in family life. Prahlad Maharaj has therefore hinted, Hitvatma patam griham andha kupam vadam gato yadarim ashrayata. Family life is considered a blind well, andha kupam, into which a person falls and dies without help. Prahlad Maharaj recommends that while one's senses are there and one is strong enough, he should abandon the Grihastha ashram and take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, going to the forest of Vrindavan. According to Vedic civilization, one has to give up a family life at a certain age, the age of 50, take vanaprastha, and eventually remain alone as a sannyasi. That is the prescribed method of Vedic civilization known as vanashram dharma. When one takes sannyas after enjoying family life, he pleases the Supreme Lord Vishnu. One has to understand one's position in family or worldly life. That is called intelligence. One should not remain always trapped in family life to satisfy his tongue and genitals in association with a wife. In such a way, one simply spoils his life. According to Vedic civilization, it is imperative to give up the family at a certain stage, by force if necessary. Unfortunately, so-called followers of Vedic life do not give up their family even at the end of life, unless they are forced by death. There should be a thorough overhauling of the social system, and society should revert to the Vedic principles, that is, the 4 varnas and the 4 ashrams. Text 55. Sattvam vichaksya mriga chestitam atmanontas chitam niyacha hridi karnadunim chachite jayanganashramam ashattama gatam pranihi hamsa sharanam virama kramena. My dear king, just try to understand the allegorical position of the deer. Be fully conscious of yourself and give up the pleasure of hearing about promotion to heavenly planets by fruit of activity. Give up household life, which is full of sex, as well as stories about such things, and take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the mercy of the liberated souls. In this way, please give up your attraction for material existence. Purport. In one of his songs, Srila Narottam Das Thakur writes, Karma Kanda Jnana Kanda Kevala Vishera Bhanda Amrita Bolia Ye Bakaya Nanayoni Sadha Fire Kadharya Bhakshana Kare Tara Janma Adha Pateyaya. Fruit of activities and mental speculation are simply cups of poison. Whoever drinks of them, thinking them to be nectar, must struggle very hard life after life in different types of bodies. Such a person eats all kinds of nonsense and becomes condemned by his activities of so-called sense enjoyment. People are generally enamored of the fruitive results of worldly activity and mental speculation. They generally desire to be promoted to heavenly planets, merge into the existence of Brahman, or keep themselves in the midst of family life, enchanted by the pleasures of the tongue and genitals. The great sage Nārada clearly instructs King Barhisman not to remain his entire life in the Grihastha ashram. Being in the Grihastha ashram means being under the control of one's wife. One has to give up all this and put himself into the ashram of the Paramahamsa, that is, put himself under the control of the spiritual master. The Paramahamsa ashram is the ashram of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, under whom the spiritual master has taken shelter. The symptoms of the bona fide spiritual master are stated in Bhagavatam 11.3.21. Tasmad gurum prapadyeta Jigyasu Shreya Uttamam Shabde Pare Chanisnatam Brahman Yupassamashrayam. Any person who is seriously desirous of achieving real happiness must seek out a bona fide spiritual master and take shelter of him by initiation. The qualification of a spiritual master is that he must have realized the conclusion of the scriptures by deliberation and arguments, and thus be able to convince others of these conclusions. Such great personalities who have taken complete shelter of the Supreme Godhead, leaving aside all the material conditions, are to be understood as bona fide spiritual masters. A Paramahamsa is one who has taken shelter of the Parabrahman, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If one takes shelter of the Paramahamsa spiritual master, gradually, through training and instruction, he will become detached from worldly life and ultimately return back home, back to Godhead. The particular mention of Anganashramam, Asattama Gatam, is very interesting. The whole world is in the clutches of Maya, being controlled by woman. Not only is one controlled by the woman who is one's wife, but one is also controlled by so many sex literatures. That is the cause of one's being entangled in the material world. One cannot give up this abominable association through one's own effort, but if one takes shelter of a bona fide spiritual master who is a Paramahamsa, he will gradually be elevated to the platform of spiritual life. The pleasing words of the Vedas that inspire one to elevate oneself to the heavenly planets or merge into the existence of the Supreme are for the less intelligent, who are described in the Bhagavad Gita as Maya Yaparita Gyanaha, those whose knowledge is taken away by the illusory energy. Real knowledge means understanding the miserable condition of material life. One should take shelter of a bona fide liberated soul, a spiritual master, and gradually elevate himself to the spiritual platform, and thus become detached from material world. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Hamsa Sharanam refers to the cottage in which saintly persons live. Generally, a saintly person lives in a remote place in the forest or in a humble cottage. However, we should note that the times have changed. It may be beneficial for a saintly person's own interest to go to the forest and live in a cottage, but if one becomes a preacher, especially in Western countries, he has to invite many classes of men who are accustomed to living in comfortable apartments. Therefore, in this age, a saintly person has to make proper arrangements to receive people and attract them to the message of Krishna consciousness. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, perhaps for the first time, introduced motor cars and palatial buildings for the residence of saintly persons, just to attract the general public in big cities. The main fact is that one has to associate with a saintly person. In this age, people are not going to search out a saint in the forest, so the saints and sages have to come to the big cities to make arrangements to receive the people in general, who are accustomed to the modern amenities of material life. Gradually, such persons will learn that palatial buildings or comfortable apartments are not at all necessary. The real necessity is to become free from material bondage in whatever way possible. According to the orders of Srila Rupa Goswami, Anashaktasya Vishayan Yatarham Upayunjata Nirbanda Krishna Sambande Yuktam Vairagyam Uchate. When one is not attached to anything, but at the same time accepts everything in relation to Krishna, one is rightly situated above possessiveness. One should not be attached to material opulence, but material opulence may be accepted in the Krishna consciousness movement to facilitate the propagation of the movement. In other words, material opulence may be accepted as yukta vairagya, that is, for renunciation. And thus ends our reading for today. We'll continue from text 56 on Monday. Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Srila Prabhupada Srila Guru Maharaj Srila Gurudev Srila Acharya Dev Ki Jai. Jai Sri Nuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. All glory to the assembled devotees, all glory to the worldwide devotees. Sama Bhaktivedanta Vrinda Ki Jai. Jai Navadut Dham Ki Jai, Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannathpur Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Balade Subhadra Ki Jai. Ganga Mai, Yamuna Mai Ki Jai, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Giri Govardhan, Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai, Shyam Kund, Radha Kund Ki Jai, Tulsi Devi, Bhakti Devi, Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Hare Krishna. Jai Scientific Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai, Harinam Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai, Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute Ki Jai, Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Nitai Gaura Premanandi, Hari 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 Bo. Jai Shri Devi Dasi Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.
Sripad Krishna Krishna Prabhu Ji ki.
Dhanyavad.
Dhanyavad.